Happy Halloween, everyone. Around 2 years ago today, I created this 1/32nd scale Panzer IV in a pumpkin patch diorama. Unfortunately, this is the only picture of it in its prime, because as of right now, it looks like this. The base is made out of cheap air-dry clay, and as you can see here, it really isn't looking its best. The pumpkins are also made out of the same air-dry clay, and they're surprisingly the best part of this scene. There's also this much less impressive tree made out of sticks hot glued together. Currently, it's busy falling apart. At one point, I had attempted to update the tank and ultimately gave up halfway through. Speaking of which, let's start our renovation. The base I'm going to set aside for later. For now, I'm going to focus on the tank. As you can see on this crudely painted model, I had at one point added bars that the add-on armor panels connect to, as the kit didn't have them originally. Every so often there is a mark where the triangular hooks will eventually be. The bar itself is made of balsa wood, and the bend downwards in the front was done by partially cutting and re-gluing the wood. The turret is mostly okay, so for now I'm removing it to focus on the hull more. First order of business is to fill the gap in the rear of the hull. Not sure if this was my fault when I originally made this, or if the kit just had bad molding. Some heavy modifying was done to the side panels of the kit, such as separating the individual plates and adding some places where shots went through. Each hole in the panel has a corresponding impact mark on the hull. This was done with a small hand drill. Time to add the triangular hooks to the bars. These are small pieces of thin plastic cut from a food container. Each one was superglued into place. And here's what it looks like after hours of pain. Hey, why is that there? Be gone. And you. And you. Oh, and I found out why this kit is so inaccurate. Maybe this thing should have went in my antique stuff video. Using more clear plastic, I made the front triangular piece of the add-on plate. This was also attached with superglue and pushed in at a slight angle. The attachment brackets of the back of each panel was, you guessed it, cut from clear container plastic. Now each panel attaches to the hull pretty easily. Each panel hangs loose on the hooks. This will allow for easy removal for painting later. And that completes the building and reconstruction of the tank. Let's move on to painting. I started by painting each panel with red oxide primer, the color all German tanks used as a base coat in World War II. I'm not too worried about being neat here, most of it will all end up getting covered up anyway. Both the front and back of the panels was painted. The hull also received a layer of it as well. Here I am hitting the model with some hairspray. I'm planning on trying something called the Hairspray Chipping technique, where you spray your object with hairspray and then another color, to make it look like the paint is chipping off. This will show the metal, or in this case primer, underneath. Use a stiff brush and water to remove the top layer. My attempt didn't turn out amazing, but for a first ever try of the technique, I don't think I did terrible. I tried to keep the effect around areas that would see a lot of use, such as the hatches, as well as most edges of the hull and the engine deck. After the chipping, I went over the silver coat with a mixture of light tan and brown. This was thinned down acrylic, and it was meant to simulate a heavily sun-faded German tan. This was done over the entire tank. And after they are installed, the tank itself is mostly complete. Later, I'll add some items to blend it into its environment more. Speaking of which, it's time to tend to the base. Not too sure where to start here. I guess I'll have to just rip the whole thing up. The pumpkins, tree, and other assorted things I removed to either use later or just get out of my way for the time being. Most of the clay came off in one sheet, and wow, okay, I guess I never removed the ancient green paint from this piece of wood before covering it in clay. Not sure why. This other part of the clay is being really stubborn. Once I eventually got that stuff off, I laid out some pieces of foam. These are then hot glued to the base. Don't worry about how boxy each piece looks. They will get trimmed down eventually, and the only reason I'm not going to show that is because it causes a rage-inducing mess all over my workbench. After everything was lumpier, I covered it in glue and dirt mixture. I also attempted to make a new tree out of a stick and some wire. Even once it was painted, it still looked weird, and it will eventually get replaced by a much better looking tree. Since the dirt layer only provides texture and also looks like cookies and cream, I gave the entire base a coat of black paint. This will also help darken the piece and make some artificial shadows. Here we have some poopy brown. This was spread over the entire diorama in 2 coats. Although it looks sickening right now, once it dries it should look better. There we go. On top of this, I'm adding a slightly less wretched earthy brown, thinned down with water. Just like the last color, this covered the entire base and allows for some contrast. The brush I'm using is an abnormally wide plastic bristled brush, the kind you'd get with a color by number book or something as a kid. This is helpful for 2 reasons. One, because it is wider, which gives better coverage, and 2 because it is a cheap brush that I can jam into this rough surface without worrying that I might damage the brush. Here's a detail the original piece was lacking, a simple fence around the pumpkins. These were nothing more than twigs cut down to size and glued into some of the elevated foam sections. It is a crop field after all, gotta keep out the pests. On all the elevated segments, and this part in the middle where the tank will sit, I added this 2mm grass carpet and fixed it in place with PVA glue. Now it's pumpkin time. Here's the original pumpkin style from the old piece. Nothing too impressive, but it does get the job done. I also have these small ceramic ones, but only in 2 sizes. Finally, we have the ones I'll be using. These are much more realistic looking and have a wide variety of shapes and sizes to choose from. Here are the ones I chose to use in the piece. I tried to give them a natural and non-uniform layout within the space they have. One had to go on the tank too, for old time's sake. For the ones on the ground, I used some of the old lichen from the original piece as the vines for the pumpkins. This was hot glued to the ground and the pumpkins. Later, this received a light wash of brown. These will add some more visual interest to the tank. I also left part of the old pumpkin decal from the original tank on the roof of the turret. And this is what the whole thing looks like together. While the tank's not the greatest when it comes to the mold, it isn't distracting enough for me to want to fix it. Also, let me know how you think I did the chipping technique, and leave some tips on how to improve it. It's my first time. The base itself is much better looking in my opinion, and the leaves and the fence are my personal favorite additions. I'm also glad the tree actually looks like, a tree. Let me know what you think. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy what I do, and have a good rest of your day, and a very happy Halloween.